A decade after the global financial crisis, the level of economic activity in the euro area remains disappointingly low. It took 9 years for real per capita GDP to surpass its pre-crisis level. Likewise, euro area inflation has stubbornly remained below the ECB's aim for much of the past decade. Throughout this period, the ECB has acted decisively to support euro area demand and lift inflation on a sustainable path towards our aim of below but close to 2%. This includes lowering key ECB rates to record low levels and adopting a wide range of non-standard monetary policy measures. Internal estimates point to a significant contribution of monetary policy to euro area GDP and inflation. By contrast, the contribution from fiscal policy to macroeconomic stabilization in the post-crisis period has been, at best, muted. During the period 2010-2012, economies representing around a third of euro area GDP carried out procyclical fiscal tightening to restore confidence in their public debt. Since then, fiscal policy has been broadly neutral. In our most recent meeting, the Governing Council responded to the continued shortfall of inflation with respect to our aim. Recent economic data have pointed to a more protracted weakness in the euro area economy. Prominent downside risks remain and inflationary pressures are muted. We introduced a package of measures designed to support the euro area expansion, the ongoing build-up of domestic price pressures, and thus the sustained convergence of inflation to our medium-term objective. The Governing Council also noted the need for countries with fiscal space to act in a timely and effective manner, and for all countries to reinforce their efforts to achieve a more growth-friendly composition of public finances. In my remarks today, I will focus on the respective roles of monetary and fiscal policy in supporting macroeconomic stabilization in the euro area. In particular, I will set out why the current juncture is particularly appropriate for fiscal stimulus. I will also offer some thoughts on how to improve the current framework. The literature on optimal currency areas points to the need to counter two types of shocks, those that are common to all countries and asymmetric ones that affect a subset of members. For common shocks, monetary policy can act to stabilize the economy. For idiosyncratic shocks, stabilization becomes trickier. Monetary policy cannot target individual countries, and those affected have lost the ability to adjust the exchange rate to help cushion the effects of the shock. For asymmetric shocks, stabilization comes ex ante from greater cross-border risk sharing to improve resilience and ex post from fiscal policy. But it is worth revisiting this classic dichotomy of using monetary policy for common shocks and fiscal for asymmetric shocks in the light of recent experiences. Fiscal policy at a national level in the euro area was unable to fully counter asymmetric shocks during the crisis. And at aggregate level, stabilization may benefit from both monetary and fiscal policy working in tandem given the current environment of low interest rates. Nominal interest rates have been declining in advanced economies since the 1980s. In large part, this decline is attributable to the decline in average inflation over that period of time. Investors require lower compensation for expected future inflation, and the fall in inflation volatility over the period has also reduced the inflation risk premium. The decline is also a result of a secular fall in the natural rate of interest, which is the rate that balances desired saving and investment in the economy. While the natural rate cannot be precisely measured, as you know, a range of estimates point to its decline. There are a number of contributing factors to the decline, principal among which is lower potential growth. Lower potential growth reduces the expected rate of return on capital, so reduces the rate at which firms are prepared to borrow to invest. Other factors that are believed to have further weight on the natural rate include the aging population in Europe, which is estimated to have reduced the natural rate by 1 percentage point over recent decades. The role of income distribution and rising saving in emerging markets and a general rise in risk aversion. This fall in the natural rate has important implications for the optimal policy mix in the euro area. The interest rate at which point monetary policy becomes accommodative falls directly in line with the natural rate, so the effective lower bound on nominal rates has become a much greater consideration in the setting of policy. Before the crisis, it was estimated that interest rates in the euro area would be likely to hit zero only once every 50 years. At the current natural rate, rates at zero or below are likely to be a much more frequent occurrence. As the experience of the past decade has shown, the decline in the natural rate is not an impediment to monetary policy providing accommodation to the economy. But it does mean that monetary policy has to remain accommodative for longer, with greater recourse to unconventional measures. Those factors carry with them a greater risk of undesired side effects. In such a situation, economic theory tells us that fiscal policy should play a much more substantive role than usual for business cycle stabilization. The reason is straightforward. In normal times, when output is close to potential and inflation is close to its objective, a fiscal expansion threatens to push inflation above the central bank aim. Central banks normally respond by raising their policy rates, and the increase in interest rates partially crowds out private sector demand. However, when the economy operates below potential, the central bank has no reason to fight a fiscal expansion. Policy rates would not increase, and private sector demand would be crowded in, leading to a much larger positive effect on aggregate demand and inflation. In other words, when policy rates are close to the lower bound, fiscal policy becomes more effective in stimulating aggregate demand. Moreover, while monetary policy must take the natural rate of interest as given, enacting the right fiscal policy can help raise it, in turn making monetary policy more powerful. Policies to encourage labor force participation, particularly of older workers, can help raise rates. Increasing spending on education and public investment can help productivity and lift both potential growth and private investment. Furthermore, any policy implies trade-offs. Side effects of very accommodative monetary policy may become unduly tangible when the economy operates below potential for a long time. In fact, while we believe that benefits overall outweigh costs, we acknowledged the challenges that a sustained low interest rate environment poses for banks. So there is a role for fiscal policy at present to help counter common shocks at the European level. To the extent that member states have created fiscal space, it would therefore be desirable for fiscal policy in the euro area to more actively support business cycle stabilization. Currently, the fiscal stance is assessed to be only mildly expansionary at the aggregate level. But the current institutional framework is insufficient to deliver that required stimulus. Fiscal policy remains a national responsibility in EMU, with some common rules applicable to individual countries. In its first incarnation, the Stability and Growth Pact focused almost exclusively on fiscal sustainability, with little emphasis on fiscal stabilization. In recent years, the Stability and Growth Pact has undergone several reforms, some of them with the explicit aim to provide a more prominent role to stabilization considerations, both at the country level and at the euro area level. The result has been rules which are now viewed as complex and opaque, with little evidence that they have delivered a more countercyclical fiscal policy stance in the euro area. The Stability and Growth Pact has limited flexibility and does not lend itself to incorporate area-wide stabilization elements. National-based fiscal rules, with the focus on domestic issues, tend to neglect positive cross-border spillovers. They fail to recognize the benefit of cross-country risk sharing and the vital role played by the public sector in underpinning it. In other words, rules based purely at a national level, or even rules that coordinate the fiscal stance across countries, are not enough by themselves. Empirical evidence suggests that spillovers from a fiscal expansion in the euro area countries to others are positive but small. So while it is important for those countries with available fiscal space to use it domestically to support overall stabilization, a central fiscal capacity with the ability to allocate expenditure across countries is much more powerful. A dedicated centralized fiscal capacity could not interfere with domestic policy, but act as an overlay to it. By focusing on common area-wide stabilization, it should not affect national fiscal space. This focus would also help to ensure that these areas of expenditure that are vital for long-run growth are not cut during any downturn, helping to preserve future fiscal space and support long-term real interest rates. Such a central fiscal capacity would clearly need to be carefully designed to mitigate any risk of moral hazard. But the essential features are that it should have sufficient firepower to effectively contribute to macroeconomic stabilization. It needs to be sizable and agile enough to react rapidly to emerging threats. But macroeconomic stabilization in the euro area can only function properly when other EMU features and institutions are adequately designed and operational. First, banking union needs to be completed. Unified banking supervision and the Single Resolution Fund have provided greater confidence that banks operating in the euro area countries face the same conditions as in their home markets. But the banking union remains incomplete as long as there is no common deposit insurance scheme, and the fiscal backstop for the Single Resolution Fund is too small. There is a political agreement about and terms of reference for the Single Resolution Fund backstop to be provided by the European Stability Mechanism, but not yet about the European Deposit Insurance Schemes, what we call EDIS. Second, it is imperative to accelerate progress on the Capital Markets Union. This is ambitious. It entails the streamlining of core aspects of national policies, such as taxation and insolvency regimes, essential to integrate legal underpinnings of cross-border markets. Capital markets can smooth country-specific shocks by providing a larger pool of financial assets that can be shared cross-border. This helps to decouple wealth and income, and hence consumption from output. Let me conclude. The euro area risk outlook is again tilted to the downside. This is a conjunctural concern, and monetary policy has reacted in accordance with its price stability mandate. The global decline in the natural rate of interest over the past quarter of a century, however, poses structural challenges. Policy rates will likely remain low by historical standards and may hit their lower bounds more frequently than in the past. We have learned from the experience in Japan that it is possible to get caught in a vicious cycle of declining inflation expectations, falling inflation, and a binding lower bound on nominal interest rates from which, when in full motion, it is difficult to escape. It is thus of the utmost importance to enhance the firepower of euro area stabilization policy by means of a policy mix that, while continuing to make full use of monetary policy, assigns a much more substantive role to fiscal stabilization policies. I firmly believe that the institutional foundations for a European fiscal capacity would be an important step in that direction. Thank you very much.